I expect that most of you that have looked at the video are serious students of history or serious teachers who want to have a firmer and more coherent grasp of the reality of the American Civil War in September of 1862 than has traditionally been provided to you by the historians. And to start, we should revisit Professor McPherson's response to Mr. Holster's questions about why it was that General Lee entered Maryland. He gave a list of reasons that I listed here. And let me just refresh your memory a bit as a base for our beginning. One, Lee hoped to do what? Influence the November congressional elections in the North. Number two, Lee hoped to win Maryland to the Confederacy. And Lee thought that he would be attracting Marylanders to his cause, and last, Lee hoped to conquer a peace. So as far as Professor McPherson is concerned, as he divines the state of mind of General Lee, there's a lot of hope. He hoped to do this and he hoped to do that. And then Professor McPherson quite legitimately tried to insert into his opinion some factual basis in reality, and to do that he made reference to, do you remember he said he even wrote Davis about this? Well, in making that remark, Professor McPherson is referring to letters that exist you can read that passed between General Lee and President Davis in the 17 days to the run-up to the Battle of Antietam. And just looking through it's important to understand the evidentiary basis for these letters that Professor McPherson, I suspect, was referring to in the form of his answer. This is a book that was published in 1961. It's called The Wartime Papers of Robert E. Lee. The editor, the primary editor, is Louis Mandarin. Louis Mandarin was an employee. He was an archivist with the Virginia State Library, where these various letters, at least most of them, repose. And what Mr. Mandarin did is he basically compiled in one place, printed in one place, all the known letters from General Lee to President Davis from September the 1st to September the 22nd. There's a lot more letters in here, but for our purposes, that's the time frame we're interested in. Most of the letters that he quotes in here are in the possession of Virginia State Library. A couple of them that were apparently written immediately after the Battle of Antietam can be found in the National Archives in a letter book that I don't believe I've yet seen. This is after 30 years of investigation. So we have to cut these historians some slack. They're sloppy. They're lazy. But, they're not making any money out of spending hours and days traveling from place to place collecting these primary documents. This is as close to you get to 1862 as possible. There are problems with the credibility of the letters. Where did they come from? How did they end up in the hands of the Virginia State Library? And Mr. Mandarin's book is a good example of what I, as a lawyer, have been suggesting to you is defective in the approach the historians make toward this particular period of time in our history. And Mr. Mandarin left out a document. He doesn't mention it. You go through the thing, he's got each letter with a number, and the number's collated in the back to the source. And as you go through date by date, it turns out he left one out. He left out a letter that General Lee wrote to President Davis. And surprisingly enough, going back to square one with these letters would be this pencil-written inventory, a list that I obtained from the Virginia State Library many years ago. And this document was written out by the archivist who received the possession of these letters from a source I'll talk about later in 1949. And this archivist listed every one of the letters, every one of the documents. And he came up with a count of 152. And for September of 1862, he correctly indicated how many letters there were in the material that he was bringing into the library. And he mentions that one was a double-sided letter. Then, in our modern day, when you go to the Virginia State Library, they'll give you a typewritten, what they call an extension record. Virginia State Library, that appears to be the same list. All the letters are described in detail, but when you count, you go down the list and you count and you compare, you're going to get 151. And it turns out that the one that's missing from the tabulation between what originally was made in 1949 and what was made thereafter, that missing item is in fact the same item that's missing from Mr. Mandarin's book. And I'll discuss that particular document with you in a minute. But to go back to Professor McPherson and his, Lee even wrote Davis. Well, yeah, he did. He wrote him a lot of letters. And what Professor McPherson may well be referring to, I want to be as honest and as forthright with the gentleman as I can, because he's not here to defend himself. He's not here to answer questions that might be presented to him. But we start with a letter that General Lee wrote to President Davis from Leesburg on September the 4th. This is just 3 or 4 days after the Battle of Second Manassas, when General Lee had shifted his army away from the position in front of Washington to Leesburg, preparing to cross the Potomac River at Edwards Ferry, Conrad's Ferry, into Maryland, and proceed on toward Frederick. He writes, and I'm going to quote the parts that are relevant to Professor McPherson's point. Mr. President, I'm extremely indebted to Your Excellency for your letter of the 30th ultimo. Now, that's another problem. Where are the letters of President Davis to General Lee? I'm still searching for them 30 years into the experience. Since my last communication to you, with reference to the movements I propose to make with this army. Now, I don't think we're going to find in the earlier printed letters here that letter that General Lee apparently wrote at some earlier moment to President Davis. But to go on. Since my last communication to you with reference to the movements I propose to make with this army, I am more fully persuaded of the benefits that will result from an expedition into Maryland. And I shall proceed to make the movement at once. unless you should signify your disapproval. The only two subjects that give me pause, the only two subjects that give me any uneasiness, are my supplies of ammunition and subsistence. Of the former, I have enough for present use, and must await results before deciding to what point I will have additional supplies forwarded. I will be able to collect supplies to advantage in Maryland. And then he says this: should the results of the expedition justify it, I propose to enter Pennsylvania, unless you should deem it unadvisable. This will still further relieve our country, and I think leaves the valley entirely free. They, the enemy, will probably concentrate behind the Potomac. So this is General Lee's mindset as recorded in this letter that's been passed down to us just as he invades Maryland. Now that missing letter, the one that's not in the record, the one that wasn't printed, let me get it for you. Here it is. Now, this is a double-sided letter. This is about well, you can pretty well get a feeling for it. It's a double-sided. It's like a large sheet of paper. It's not 11 by 17. It's about 11 by 13. And the habit is to the custom of his staff officers using such a piece of paper. Whether this piece of paper was inside some sort of a binder or ledger and at the end was pulled out, and whether it had attached to it any piece of carbon that you could make copies from is not known. But you would write on the left side of the paper, you would write on the right side of the paper, then you turn the paper over and you write on the back on the left side. And then when you were done, you could fold it like that, then fold it as I've shown you earlier into 3 parts, and then you could write along the top of it what it is. And in this case it says, General Lee, camp on the Opakin. The Opakin is a stream that empties into the Potomac just a little south of Sharpsburg, and it rises in the Shenandoah Valley and runs north into the Potomac. And it's to that location after the Battle of Antietam that General Lee brought his army. And the date on the back of this is September 22, 1862, which is 5 days after the battle occurred. You open it up and you find that it's marked copy up here at the top, and it's dated September the 7th, 3 days after that letter we just read General Lee wrote to President Davis. And as I'll show you later, it's in the handwriting of General Lee's adjutant, Walter Taylor, the young man that was on his staff from the very beginning of the war to the very end. And it's a long letter, but since it hasn't been published, and trial lawyers, don't like coincidences. They don't like, we forgot. We have a tough time with that, because we're students of human nature, or we're not going to survive very long in a trial court. So it's a serious question that would be examined carefully in a trial court with witnesses on the stand from the various organizations involved to explain how it was that this document has not yet seen the light of day, although it's available. As you can see, I have it. But I got it late in this situation. I was already in trial, let's put it that way. And I realized this existed. Mr. President, now, remember all that business about these historians want to talk about General Lee's going to, win, he's going to conquer a peace, he's going to get Maryland onto the side of the Confederacy, he's going to be so incredibly successful that he's going to cause Lincoln to just abandon the war and give up and let the Confederate people go. Remember all that stuff these historians want to talk about? I didn't give you much of Gary Gallagher, but you can watch him on YouTube and he'll tell you those kinds of remarks. Well, this letter is a sobering reality to that. And it's probably the reason it hasn't been published in this Wartime Papers book, and why it's so, at least for a period of years, it was hidden from view. It wasn't destroyed, but it was hidden from view. It was not made readily. You would have to really dig to stumble across it. Mr. President, I find that the discipline of the Army, which from the manner of its organization, the necessity of bringing it into immediate service, its constant occupation and hard duty was materially defective, has not been improved by the forced marches and hard service it has lately undergone. I need not say to you that the material of which it is composed is the best in the world, and if properly disciplined and instructed, would be able successfully to resist any force that could be brought against it. Think of McClellan coming to Antietam. Nothing can surpass the gallantry and intelligence of the main body. Now, the main body, ladies and gentlemen, that's an important military term, has definite meaning. And in this situation, as you'll see, it means the hard core. But there are individuals who, from their backwardness in duty, tardiness of movement, and neglect of orders, do it no merit, do it no credit. These, if possible, should be removed from its roles if they cannot be improved by correction. Owing to the constitution of our courts martial, great delay and difficulty occur in correcting daily evils. We require more promptness and certainty of punishment. One of the greatest evils from which many minor ones proceed is the habit of straggling from the ranks. The higher officers feel it as I do, and I believe have done all in their power to stop it. It has become a habit difficult to correct. And with some, the sick and the feeble, it results from necessity. But with the greater number from design, these latter do not wish to be with their regiments, nor to share in their hardships and glories. They are the cowards of the army. Desert their comrades in time of danger and fill the houses of the charitable and hospitable in the march. I know of no better way of correcting this great evil than by the appointment of a military commission of men known to the country and having its confidence and support to accompany the army constantly with a provost marshal and guard to execute promptly its decisions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you understand what we're talking about here. If in addition a proper inspector general with sufficient rank and standing with assistants could be appointed to see the execution of orders and to fix the responsibility of acts, great benefits and saving to the service would be secured. I know there is no law for carrying out these suggestions, but beg to call your attention to the subject and ask if this plan does not meet with your approval, that in your better judgment you will devise some other, for I assure you some remedy is necessary, explicitly now when the army is in a state whose citizens it is our purpose to conciliate and bring with us. Every outrage upon the feelings and property should be checked. Now, what does the letter tell you? Whatever General Lee's state of mind was on September 4th, before he crossed the army into Maryland, by September the 7th, when he's gotten near Frederick, he is starting to count up his troops. He's a mathematician. All he needs to know is the number of hard bodies available to throw into the fire. And his count comes barely to 40,000 men. He's lost somewhere over 20,000 men, not counting the casualties he suffered at Second Manassas. You see, all those young men marching in those long columns came toward the Potomac, came toward the border of Virginia, came to the border of the Confederacy, and a great number of them fell away and did not cross that river. So that is the reality he's absorbing on September the 7th. And this idea, that he's going to be able to accomplish anything on an offensive basis, much less, carry his army into Pennsylvania, is just not a reality. And it's at this point that he begins to consider with Stonewall Jackson how he's going to prevent McClellan from pursuing him when by force of circumstance he has to retire into the Shenandoah Valley if his men are going to eat, because there's plenty of supplies in Maryland for a few days. That's it. You have 40,000 men like locusts sweeping across the countryside, and you're going to have to move quickly. Now, let's just look at the rest of these letters. See how his tone changed. On the 5th, he tells the president he's changing his line of communication into the Shenandoah Valley. He's talking about his supplies. He's still thinking that his movement itself will cause the enemy to abandon their outposts in the valley and recross into Maryland. And that's important to him because he wants his rear cleared whatever he's going to do. Then on the 7th, he tells President Davis that the entire army is now on the line of the Monocacy in front of Frederick. And he talks about he's going to endeavor to purchase supplies. And he's telling the president that contrary to expectations, there isn't going to be any great uprising of sympathy from the Marylanders. So remember that Professor McPherson had that idea throughout. Gone by September the 7th. Gone. All right. He issues a proclamation somehow. In what form, how widely it was publicized, the record does not say. Where did he get it? Was it his idea to create the, no. The form of the proclamation came to him from President Davis. President Davis sent an identical proclamation to Bragg, who's moving through Kentucky at the same time we're speaking. The 8th, he's still endeavoring to break up his line of communication. That's all that has been communicated between General Lee and Davis until you get to the last letter that he writes on September 8th. And I don't know how you square, Professor McPherson, your very smooth quote, conquer a peace, unquote, with this letter that he writes to the president on September the 8th. It's really tough for me to comprehend it. If you were here, no doubt you'd be able to help the people of the jury understand this better than I may. Mr. President, the present posture of affairs, in my opinion, place it in the power of the government of the Confederacy to propose to that of the United States the recognition of our independence. Such a proposition coming from us at this time could in no way be regarded as suing for peace. Kind of hard to understand how that could be so. Well, he tells us. But being made when it is in our power to inflict injury upon our adversary. Now, Professor McPherson, is that what you were referring to? To communicate to us General Lee's state of mind? Yes, it was in the power of General Lee, with that hard corps that crossed the Potomac with him, to inflict injury upon the enemy. That is not the same thing, sir, as telling the president that, he's going to conquer the enemy army in his front, and in that way win a peace. That's silliness. You just go back to that letter that was withheld from the record for so many years, and you can understand the dire straits that he's in. This is not an army that is moving like, a great victorious army. This is a shell of an army that's been worn out by the battles that General Lee threw it into, and is barely able to stand up on its own 2 feet. And that the best it's going to be able to do is hunker down between rocks and hold off the horde. Not complicated. If you throw out the romance and face the hard facts. The rejection of this order, this offer, will prove to the country that the responsibility for the war going on isn't our fault. The proposal of peace will enable the people of the United States to determine at their coming elections whether they will support those who favor the war or those who want to bring it to a termination. There again, you see, you find a basis of information that Professor McPherson would no doubt have thrown out if he'd been cross-examined instead of been thrown that softball question by Mr. Holzer. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, think about the reality of the elections. Yeah, the war was coming home to bite the people of the North in the butt. The body bags were coming home. Body bags created by General Lee's offensive behavior. And certainly, as it is true in our time, the longevity of a war, bringing back death to our families, causes many of us to want to vote out the culprits that got us into the war in the first place. But they're never enough. They're never enough. You can go back to Vietnam and President Johnson not taking a chance on a second term to find any substance to that. But you're certainly not going to get a majority in the actual fact of the matter is that the Democrats did pick up seats in the House, but not enough to go anywhere close to gaining a majority. All right, that takes us to the 9th of September, when we're going to get into this lost order business. General Lee writes President Davis a letter that says, quote, "I have just received your letter of the 7th from the Rapidan, informing me of your intention to come to Leesburg." Now this is the catalyst. There's no way General Lee wants to see President Davis in his headquarters. So he's got to act. He's got to prevent that from happening. And it's also true now that he can understand that McClellan has got his army organized again and is moving out with 2 wings in the center, tentatively coming toward him slowly. He knows that. He knows that when that huge army gets to the Monocacy, he better be gone, because he can't defend that line. This is not complicated. I don't know why these guys need to make it so complicated. It wouldn't have been complicated to Napoleon. It wouldn't have been complicated to Eisenhower or Patton. All right, now I want to say something, what else these letters prove. We want to turn now to the ultimate question and deal with the ultimate witness, General Lee. If we were in fact in trial, we all know that the high moment of the trial would be when General Lee came in the courtroom and took the oath to tell the truth and sat down on the witness stand. And the question is, well, what would he tell us? Well, I'll show you, ladies and gentlemen, what he wrote in 1868 to General D.H. Hill. He's going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know nothing. I don't have a clue how this order got lost. I don't know. I was not involved. And so now, a lawyer like me, with a great deal of respect, but at the same time, you're lying, General. And I've showed you in other videos that General Lee lies. And you can recall my reading you the jury instruction about credibility of witnesses and the fact that you have to take into consideration in assessing credibility an admission of untruthfulness. And if you look at the General Lee live video about the Gettysburg campaign, it's an admission of untruthfulness. When it's convenient to General Lee, he lies. In this context of communicating with the public, with you and me. When he communicates with President Davis, he's absolutely honest in his statements. So he doesn't know anything. Now, let me marshal all the objective facts. Now, I'm not interested in professorial opinions, lecturers pontificating. I'm talking about hard, solid, undisputed facts from which you, in the jury room, exercising the reason that you all enjoy, can reach inferences, draw inferences. And the question is, do these facts demonstrate that General Lee on this issue is probably lying?